Hello, welcome to Data Analytics with Python for Beginners. We are at session 4, SQL. All right. SQL essentially is a language that communicates with database such that you can communicate to and fro with the database. Right. This is because nowadays we are experiencing a huge amount of data, and this data is normally stored in database. So we need to communicate with databases in order to pull the data in for our data analysis. And SQL is one of the most common language that we use to communicate with database. Right. So SQL essentially is a programming language for database management. It allows us to connect to database and query data from it. All right. Here we are going to use Python to execute SQL. All right. And what we are going to do will be convert data from data frames and upload into database. And we are also going to the opposite direction, where we convert data from database into data frames and export it as CSV. All right, so we are going to work both ways with the database. All right. So the package that we are going to use in Python is called SQLite 3. Right, so we'll import it in a while. So essentially what happens is that you have a database table, right? So first of all, you will establish a connection, right? This is the blue line where you connect data table to the database, right? This is called a connection object. Think about it as a pipe linking the database to your Python. All right, so that is a connection object. Now, then we have another object called the cursor object, right? This cursor object helps us to execute actions or query between the database and the table, all right? So if you want to execute any commands, we execute it through this cursor object. All right, so let's split the screen into two again. Right, on the left side, we have the slides. On the right side, we have the Python program. Let's create a new Python program, P3. And let's add many rows below. All right. So first of all, let's import the SQLite 3 package. All right. After that, let's create a connection object, right? So this is a connection object, all right, that we created. All right, is using the SQ3 package with the function connect. We are going to connect to a database called AMK, right? .db. DB is a database. Now, if you have if this AMK database is not there, so by writing this line of code, essentially you create a new AMK database. All right, and then after that we create the cursor object. All right, the cursor object here. Right, so it's really the cursor object is really an extension of the connection object, and then dot cursor, which is the method or function. All right, so we will establish the pipe, which is the connection object, and then we will create a cursor object. All right, so typically in database, after you have make the changes, right, to the database, we need to commit to the changes. So there's this a connection object commit method. All right, so you want to finalize your changes in your database. It's like a save into your database. And then finally, after that, we will close the database, right? It's important that we close the database so that it's not you open something, you close something. Otherwise, if the database or if the connection object is not closed, you may pose problems in the future, right? And after you have closed your connection, right, you cannot do anything to the database anymore. You will have to reopen the database. All right. All right. Let's do an exercise to export data to our database. So first of all, let's create a connection object. All right, create a connection object and a cursor object. Right, just copy and paste it here. And then hit Shift Enter. Right, so we have created connection object and cursor object. Now after that, let's create a data frame. Right, so first of all, we import pandas as PD. Then we read the CSV file from the housing data AMK. This is CSV. So we use pandas to read CSV and we create a data frame called housing data AMK. And then we want to export this data frame to database, right? So the method we use is housing data AMK is the data frame. The method we use is to SQL. All right. So to SQL, right? So to SQL, we are going to create a table, right? We are going to create a table in the database called housing data AMK, all right, via the connection object, right? The connection object is the blue line, right? And if this housing data AMK exists, what we will do is we will replace. All right. So let's copy all this. Let's copy all this and paste it here. Right. Here we need to moderate a bit because there's a line, right? So here will be, right? If exists, we'll replace. So this is the same line of code. All right, after that, let's hit Shift Enter. All right, so what it tells us is that there are 222 rows in the housing data AMK. So we have exported the housing data AMK to SQL. All right, so that's how we do it. All right, export the data to database. Now, with that, now we can query from the database, right? We want to query data from the database. So what we do is we use the cursor object, right? This cursor object is specific, right, to the connection here, right? This cursor object is defined, all right? It's not a random thing, right? So we are going to use this particular cursor object that we have created, and then we are going to execute some SQL code, right? So the codes highlighted in yellow is essentially an SQL code. It's just that we execute it via Python. Now, if you are in other programming language, you can actually execute the SQL language also. All right. So let's look at this SQL language, SQL. Right. So what it says is SQL, the good thing about SQL is the action is very straightforward. Every action pertaining to SQL will all be uppercase. Right. So here they say select is an action. And then star here means everything. Select everything from the table, housing data AMK, right? Select everything from the table where, right? Basically you're filtering now where the block values is less than 300 or the floor area square meters is more than 70. All right, so basically you select the data from the housing data AMK, but you also filter off based on your requirements, right? So after that, we will fetch the first 5 rows of our what we pull out from the database, right? So let's copy and paste this into Python. Right here, we need to adjust a bit because it's the same line of code. All right, and after that, let's hit Shift Enter. Right, so this is the first five rows that we pull from the database, right? So we see that we want block numbers to be less than 300, square floor area square meter is more than 70, right? So this is a block number, right? This is the floor area, right? So same, block number, floor area. All right, so that's how we query data from the database, and also we filter at the same time. All right. Of course, if you want to see all the records, you can always fetch all. Otherwise, we just fetch many, or use the method fetch many, right, to see generally how does it look like, right? So this is how we query from the database. This is very typical. All right. So in SQL, the most used function is select. All right. So usually you will say that select what, right? What variable, okay? And then from which table, right? In a database, they can have multiple tables. So you need to specify which table, and then you can group them by, right? Consolidate them based on certain criteria, or you can order them by, right? Basically, you want to sort, right? Or you want to filter, you can use where, which we use here, where, or you can use having. All right, so these are some of the actions that you can do using SQL. All right, so we can also use some aggregate function later on, we'll see, or we can join table, right? Or we can group some of the values, records based on some criteria, or we can sort based on ascending or descending order. All right, or we can join table using the on, right? Just like what we did previously, where you have the inner join, outer join, right? It will be very similar. Okay. Right. Next, we want to extract. So we have a database, right? We want to know what are the variable there, right? What are the variable names in the database? So all we need to do is we call for the cursor object, right? And use the method description. Just copy and paste. And then they will tell us, like here, you can see that this is like the column name, or this is the object, right? I mean the column name as in the index, right? So index, month, town, all these are basically the column name that we have previously. All right, so you can know which variables are in the database. All right, now let's execute another SQL, but this time around we'll select the variable year, resale price, floor square meter from this table, where the story range, right? Story range is 10 to 12, and then ordered by year, floor area square meters ascending. All right. So here for the database, we don't have the method head like your data frame. So we need to use description so that we know what are the variable names in the database. So this will help us to filter, right? That's why we look at this before we design our SQL criteria. So let's copy and paste it here. And then let's look at it again. Okay. All right. And then let's fetch 10 of them. So you can see, right? Whereas the floor area is ordered, but sorry, they ordered by year first. They ordered by year first, right? After that, they ordered by the square floor area square. All right. So these are the first 10 rows of data that we have selected based on these criteria, right? We have filtered quite some. We have filtered for the story range, right, of 10 to 12 floors. All right. Alternatively, we can have some aggregate function. So for example, we want to select, right, the resale price, but we want to compute the average of the resale price from this database, right? Then after that, we have just fetch many, right? Right, so the average of the resale price is basically 304,626. Right, or we want to count how many resale price are there, right? Basically, you can count how many resale units or transactions, right? So average and count is basically the aggregate function, right? 225 transactions. Okay. Now, if you want to alter the table in the database, right? For example, we want to add a column or variable called PSF. PSF basically is a price per square feet. So what we do is, first of all, we alter the table. Again, this is SQL language, SQL. We alter the table. So this is the table name. And we add is an action, this particular column, PSF. All right, so we have to add first. Then after you have added, then you update the table, right? And you set this PSF, which is a new column that you have created. This PSF is equals to your resale price, right? Which is one of the variable, divide by floor area square meter, multiplied by 10.7639, right? That is basically converting square meters into square feet, right? And then because you want to use price per square feet, you have to use the resale price divided by per square feet, area per square feet. All right. So let's execute this, right? Where we alter and update the table. Oops. Okay. So this one should be up there. All right. Right. After that, we want to fetch everything from the housing data AMK. Let's show the first 5. I can see. Yeah. And remember, we have added a PSF in the last column. So this is really the PSF. Okay. So this is a PSF. Okay. So that's how we alter or update the table in the database. Now, after we are happy with that, we will commit the changes we have in the database, and then we'll close it, right? Close the connection. All right, that's very important. All right, every time you work with database, remember to close the connection, right? So just now what we have done is basically we have used go from the data table to the database, right? And then we extract data from the database to work with, right? So essentially, all right, we have done this, but let's do it another way, whereby we export, right, data from the database, right, and go to the data table. Okay, and after we export data to the data table, we will export it into the CSV format. We'll convert it into a CSV format. All right, so now we are going from database to the table. Again, let's create a new connection object. We call it CONN, and correspondingly, let's create a cursor object. Okay. Shift Enter. After that, let's create a data frame called DF, and we are using pandas, and see that now the data is in the database. So we need to call this method read SQL query. Basically, we are pulling the data from the database, whereby we select everything, all right, from the database, and then we are going to through the connection object con. All right, so basically this is just pulling data straight from the database and convert it into a data frame. After that, we look at the data frame. All right, we look at the head of the data frame. Let's copy this. Right, so you can see this is a data frame, right, where we extract the data from the database. Very simple. And after that, with this data frame, we will export them into CSV. We want to call the CSV file KMK test CSV. So we use the data frame and the method to CSV. Right, so we export data frame to CSV. And then finally, we close the connection of to the database. All right. And then you hit Shift Enter. All right. So now we know how to do both ways, from data to database, as well as database back to data table. All right. So to sum up, this is what we have done today. We have connect to the database using the connection object. All right. Then we can export data from the data through the data frame to database. We can query from the database using some of the SQL codes. And we can also do data management, like what are the data to filter or do some aggregation. And then finally, we can export the data from the database to data frames, as well as to CSV. All right, so very simple. And we have presented some of the tutorial question here, right? Using the AMK database that you have created, right? You can work this out, and then probably plot some charts in terms of box plots and scatter plots, which we have learned 2 lessons earlier. All right. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll see you next time.